It is 20 minutes to 7 o'clock and you're watching Morning Live, and a warm welcome back. Thank you so much for staying with us. Now, the Department of Justice and Constitutional Development has reviewed certain laws in order to improve the response of the criminal justice system with regards to gender-based violence and femicide. Now, this was announced last week following the Cabinet's approval of the introduction of the Domestic Violence Amendment Bill, the Sexual Offences and Criminal and Related Matters Amendment Bills. Now, this after a reported rise in gender-based violence cases during this lockdown period. And joining us now to discuss this is the director of the Women's Empower organization, Wise for Africa, Advocate Brenda Madumise. Advocate, a very good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome.
Good morning, sir.
What is your response to the bill proposals? Do you get a sense that it's going to be yet another talk shop and no implementation?
It's a multiple approach that is being advocated by policy and law, right? So when there's a decision to amend legislation, is because we have found that there's a vacuum or a lacuna in the law. So if you look at the Domestic Violence Amendment Act, what we are looking for there is to give more powers to other individuals to lodge a protection order complaint on behalf of a victim, right? So most of the time, you'll find that victims are not able to do so because they're scared or they can't get themselves to the nearest court. So what this amendment does is that a counselor, a teacher, of an NGO community can assist in the obtaining of a protection order, right? The second aspect of the Domestic Violence Amendment Act is around the powers that the police are given, that they can now issue. They can have a warrant of arrest immediately on the spot, right? They never did. And here the challenge has been, and I think is the application of the law by the law enforcement agencies themselves, right? So you have had this law for the longest of time, and the police have not been able to apply and implement that law to the satisfaction of all of us. Now we have added and given. We trust and hope that there is going to be a proper training of the and how they should apply the Domestic Amendment Act that is now being put in place. The other aspect of the Criminal Act with the sexual offences is what we have been calling out for, the opening up of the sex register. So you will know that the sex register that we had was only applicable to those sex offenders who might be working with children or mentally retarded individuals. Now, this new amendment is to allow for anyone who has sexually violated a human being will be on that register, and it will be open for public scrutiny. So we're no longer hiding who are the sexual offenders. The last thing around this amendment is around bail and parole, and when can you grant bail? And we are pushing for not granting bail in certain domestic violence cases or sexual offences cases, right? And that there is a fixed period around parole that if you have been a perpetrator of a domestic violence or a sexual offence or sexual harassment, that there's a minimum of not being given parole. So it's to bail applications in domestic violence, and also regulate the removal and inclusion of a sex offender in the register.
I guess that is the big problem they advocate because, well, it is often said that if you do not report any case of gender-based violence, you are equally complicit in the commission of that particular offence. But then some people are so afraid of reporting such because of fear of victimization by the culprits. Do you get a sense then that those who are reporting such cases do get the protection? I mean, you've just mentioned a protection order earlier on. Do you get the sense that they will be protected because these culprits, after serving their jail term or whatever the case may be, they will come back to the same community and and live with the same people that they report the matter?
Protection order is meant to. So when we have laws, what it says to all of us is that we have to conduct ourselves in such a way that we comply and adhere to that policy or the law. So we can't be seen to be a lawless nation or lawless individuals. When I go before a court and obtain a protection order against an individual, the expectation from me and even anyone around me is that the one who is served with the protection order will adhere to the terms and conditions of that protection order, be lawless and do things with impunity, right? So when I have a protection, expect that I will be protected from any harassment, I'll be protected from any abuse, I'll be protected from any violence, right? And that protection order is sacrosanct because it's a law that tells you that you shouldn't do as prescribed in that protection order. So can we stop pretending that we can wake up in the morning and do as we please when you are given an order of a court that you must behave in a particular way? We can't have impunity.
Okay, and the Domestic Violence Amendment Bill, Advocate, creates a legal duty on just about any person to report domestic violence. So how does the law then deal with people that don't report witnessing violence before?
So what we're trying to get to is that almost all of us must have a stake in reporting domestic violence, right? We're creating the space for people to do so. That when you get, and we have seen it, we receive calls of people who tell us that a neighbor or a friend or a family member is a subject of domestic violence, and they've taken upon themselves as family members to go and report the crime on behalf of a family member. When I go before a doctor and I've got bruises and I tell my doctor that I have been physically abused by my intimate partner, the doctor, when they fill in that J83 form, state, they have an obligation to report the crime on my behalf, right? So we all have a duty to do so when we see violence, to report it, right? And be ready to come forward when you are asked to be a witness in that matter. Most times people away and become afraid because they believe that it matter. Once someone has been violated in the manner that they have been violated, it stops being a private matter because it is a crime on that individual.
Okay. Well, now the bill criminalizes failure to report violence in a country where it has become a common practice to turn a blind eye. Will this improve the situation? Because we know that even cultural nuances also come into play, with some people saying that they're not going to be poking their noses on other families' domestic affairs.
So it's what I've just keep on saying, and I'm going to emphasize. Gone are the days where we're going to argue and say that it's a domestic issue and we turn a blind eye. We have turned a blind eye for too long, where we have lost many women when we saw the signs that they were there, and we kept quiet because we believe that culture or tradition tells us that you should not get involved in other people's affairs. But we do get involved in other people's affairs in a different way. But when it comes to violence, when they are violated, we tend to not want to get involved. What all of us is to, when you see the signs, when I have a friend who is physically abused or emotionally abused, it's my moral obligation and duty to do something about it. And what the Domestic Violence Act does is that and so if you look at the amendment, really, I still have to have your consent, right? Because what we're trying to do is to protect the victims or the survivors of violence, right? So when I go before and I share with my therapist what has been going through, and my therapist says, I can, in terms of domestic violence, on your behalf report this abuse. Are you okay with me doing so? Yeah. And because it takes the heat and the burden on you most of the time, and I would want to believe that most will take that up when someone does it on their behalf, because it assists you to not to feel the pressure and the burden placed on you as the survivor and the victim of violence.
Okay, and with this bill, Advocate, you can also apply for protection orders online to get a sense of security. Well, fair and well, it is a good idea, but what about those who cannot use or access the internet for different reasons? Do protection orders really work?
And what, so the protection order, I mean, it's really and I don't know how many people understand the process of applying for protection order. You know, it takes a lot from anyone to apply for that protection order. You go before a magistrate court, you go to magistrate court to apply for that order. You are given an interim order, right? There has to be additional features given and choices given to all of us. If I want to apply online, I can if I have the facility to apply online. But if I don't have the facility, I know I can approach a competent court to issue that protection order. So we need to have multiple entries to allow for many victims to the application of a protection order. The online is going to assist for those who have the means to access the protection order online. And I think it was brought in because of the COVID-19 to give the courts the space to be able to receive these protection orders online. But you still have people who can walk in physically into a court and apply for a protection order. So we need to look at many avenues and platforms that can afford the to lodge to apply for a protection order without spending lots of money on it, or just being burdened with how this thing happens, because it's extreme sport. I mean, it takes a lot from any individual to go before a court, apply for a protection order, and then take that protection order herself to the police station to get it a perpetrator.
Okay. Now, the Sexual Offences and Related Matters Amendment Bill also talks about, expanding the scope of the National Register for Sex Offenders to also include the particulars, first and foremost, of all the sex offenders, and not only offenders against children. But to this day, advocates, the list is still not available to institutions like schools, and some of these offenders who are not even barred still have access to school children. Is the country's justice system serious about dealing with rape and sexual offences? Because often we've seen and heard cases on social media, well, the yet unproven cases on social media of some of the victims being mocked by police officers the minute they start reporting on these cases, and in some instances being turned away. Do you think that the country's justice system is really serious about dealing with this scourge?
The country's justice system will be serious when you and I continue to expose the ineptness, that we continue to offer workable solutions, that we continue to be vigilant in showing how we don't receive justice from the justice system itself. That's the first thing. So it requires tenacity from work hard to ensure that when we talk of this justice and we demand it, we know how it looks like, and we demand it because it's our right to receive this justice. They sex offenders register. For many people in this country, many of us were not aware that there is a sex offenders register, right? Mm-hmm. And many schools were not even utilizing it, right? When they appoint teachers, they didn't even cross-reference that applicant with the sex offender register. So if we were to ask many schools whether they have ever gone back to the sex offender registry, which the limited that we had for a while, whether they had been able to look at the name of the school, that applicant who wants to be a teacher, whether is in the sex offender register or not, you'll be surprised that most schools have not done it. But it was available, right? Mm-hmm. It was available to schools. It's available to mental institutions. It is available to hospitals where you have to work with children. Now, this amendment, what it does then is it opens it up. It is about every single sex offender who's going to be in that register. So what it means is that if you take up a job anywhere, so if you look at the case of Unene, the post office gentleman who is not even a gentleman, the murderer and the rapist, is that if we had the sex offender register at the time, his employer, being the post, gone through that register and would have found his name there, right? Because he would have found that he is an offender before, right? And then they would have taken the decision as an employer whether they go ahead with his employment or they don't appoint him. But also with sex offenders, I think as citizens, we need to be active in, once we know that someone is a sex offender, we need to make the community, society as a whole aware that this individual is a sex offender, and the chances are we now need to conduct ourselves and how we relate to the individual in a different way. So we need to know who are the sex offenders, and when they come back into the community, how we deal with sex offenders, right? Because if you're a sex offender, you need to we need to be vigilant to ensure that you are not going to do it again, right? And we need to guard against that.
Right. Just before I let you go, Advocate, what is your view then regarding the Criminal-Related Matters Amendment Bill that seeks to prohibit the granting of bail in cases of domestic violence? I mean, we need to consider in greater detail the sensitivity around this matter, because on the one hand, first and foremost, is the issue of the basic tenet of legality, or the basic tenet of the law, that everyone is assumed innocent until proven guilty. But then, of course, then there comes the issue of rape. I mean, rape is just rape. Whether there is a court process involved or not, rape is just rape, and concomitant action needs to be taken. So
all of us, we have the right to bail. It's entrenched in our constitution. Every individual who is found, who's accused of any crime, when they appear before a court, they bail, right? What we're arguing for in the domestic matters is that it was sort of a given that even the prosecutors were not going to oppose bail. So someone has violated a woman, the prosecutors don't even mount a fight for that victim of abuse. They just accept that the perpetrator can walk away without even for bail or anything like that. What we are forcing now is that for domestic violence cases, when they appear, the prosecutor must oppose bail and fight for that bail not to be granted. And there's a criteria of things that must be met before that bail can be granted or not granted. So we just don't want people to take it for granted that if you have physically violated a woman, it's a walk in the park that you will get bail. No, we are going to oppose bail now. As a matter of fact, bail will be opposed in all domestic violence cases.
Okay, Advocate Brenda Madumise, great chatting to you. I wish we had more time, to tackle this matter of national importance. Thank you so much for your time, and we certainly hope that we'll see a heightened level of activism on the ground to ensure that this scourge is brought to book. And we certainly hope that that gender-based violence, since it cannot be dealt alone by the law enforcement agencies, but the perpetrators and communities themselves have to act. Many thanks to Advocate Brenda Madumise, who is the director of Women's Empowerment Organization Wise for Africa, for discussing the bills approved by Cabinet to sort of improve the response by South Africa's criminal justice system to gender-based violence and femicide.